Welcome, everyone. Welcome along to the Digital Culture Ideas Show and podcast. So, this show helps you understand one of the biggest cultural shifts that I think is happening right now, which is the shift to a much more digital culture and a much more digital life. So, it's really about how technology and the internet is massively changing the way we think, interact, communicate, and even make decisions. So today I'm speaking with Andre Rowell, who's editor and creative director of one of my favorite magazines, Into Magazine. So welcome to the show, Andre. How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Andre, I think to give our audience a bit of context about who you are, maybe you could tell them a little bit about yourself, and in particular, I'm really keen for you to have a chat about some of your recent experience with tech, because you have an exciting project on the go that I think would be great for people to know about.
Okay, cool. Well, as to start with, I mean, as much as I like the idea of propagating this image of me driving fancy cars, trying on luxury watches, and drinking champagne
It's
all
not
day,
you?
it is no, no. I mean, a lot of my time is actually spent in the back end of our website, going through not only the data but also fixing up things that I break when we're experimenting with different UX and paywall plugins and bits and pieces like that. So it's actually it's a very solitary existence sometimes, really kind of stuck in the data. So but there's so much insight in that, and I guess we could talk a little bit more about
Mm.
the way that media is going. But I think at the end of the day, just that connection with an audience, like with a reader or a viewer on the other end, I think is amazing insight. So that's what I really love. A lot of that is just kind of mucking around with the code and the data. Occasionally there might be a luxury car in there, but a lot of it is the data.
Oh, fair enough. And in terms of how you actually got into your role, like, so your background is journalism, I'm imagining.
Well, you'd think so. I'm not a proper journalist. I'm not. I haven't had any journalistic training. It's really been on the job, but I started out in advertising, some screenwriting, and kind of just bumbled into it really, which is what I tend to do with a lot of decisions that I make and a lot of my career pathway.
Well, I think that's still very much aligned to, writing content and doing that piece. But actually, a lot of life is like that, isn't it? Like you say, you kind of pick up opportunities as they come up. And that's how psychologists like me got into security. That's
Yeah.
might seem a bit of a weird segue as well. Um, so yeah, and can you tell us about this project that's dear to your heart that you're working on? Because it's pretty amazing and it's pretty kind of out there, and you're dealing with kind of NASA engineers and philanthropists, and it's pretty cool.
Oh, again, I mean, this goes back to kind of the bumbling nature of my life, and so I know I've been really privileged along the way to have met and interviewed and profiled some incredible people, incredible entrepreneurs, incredible engineers, philanthropists, and so that has been a really inspiring kind of process, really, of my development that's come through. As I say, the really fortunate position that I've had with the magazine to just be part of that, to be kind of a conduit for what's happening in that world, and then bringing it to an audience, and that has to rub off a little bit. And at the same time, I've been really concerned with some things that are happening. So my family comes from the Cook Islands. Part of my family, I'm a
Hmm.
I'm a fruit salad of different cultures, but when I was growing up, I really embraced the insights and hopefully the knowledge that was passed down by my Cook Islands grandmother, who was really big on talking about the genealogy, and she was really desperate to pass that on to someone. I come from a family of
Mm.
Bogans, and by and large we're quite into our trucks and cars and stuff like that. But I think she was really keen for someone to sit and listen, and I really enjoyed that, and I felt like I took on a bit of responsibility with that too. So it's a really, really amazing kind of process, which helped frame my perspective. Like when you can go back and put yourself within the context of a genealogy that goes back, 500,
Mm.
600 years, it kind of messes with your perspective a little bit. But at the same time, really kind of frames things up in terms of some of the decisions that we make about some of the intergenerational stuff and the long-term decision making, which, by the way, I think that we should incorporate into some Western business practices as well, and move away from this kind of quarterly reporting into some really long-term
Mm.
strategy. Anyway, I'll go back to so when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time in the islands, and I could kind of see this really interesting shift, which wasn't always a good thing. But the move away from really localized, self-sufficient production and a lot of export into really focusing on tourism, which is great.
Yes.
It's great on paper. But the problem is when you put the focus on one sector. Um, you become really reliant on that, and we can see what happens when you have a
Yeah.
global pandemic and things shut down. But I think also stuff started to happen elsewhere as well. Like when you remove the commercial viability of a piece of land that's been in your family for generations, and you can no longer really survive off that. It starts to mess kind of with social stuff as well. And then when you put in a
Mm.
framework, which is again really reliant on one sector, but then also you start to really rely on aid, that kind of creates this reliance as well. So I was really keen to look at how we could bring in some innovation to open up some of those export pipelines again. I mean, a big catalyst for this was when Dad died in his 50s. So then it came on to me to look after the land and mow the lawns and do the gardening and stuff like that. But uh, I started to see that there were some incredible resources around, but very little flow through to the local community and healthcare and stuff like that. So I really wanted to be able to use family land to open up export pipelines through a little bit of innovation. So some added value processing, extraction, and that kind of thing. One of the side effects of globalization, which hasn't is not a bad thing always, but one of the things is that it's hard for small communities to deal with or compete with larger trading nations. So there's no good sending like a ton of pawpaw to market, but you can do things like extracting enzymes and bits and pieces out of them. So do the low volume, high value stuff. So that was really that kind of thing that started off. Um, and then I got really interested in the fishing space as well and what was happening in the EEZ, and started looking at fishing
Mm.
boats. Um, but again, if you're a really small player trying to compete against scale, you need some tech and innovation on your side. So I noticed that everyone was using low resolution sea surface temperature data. But at the same time, I'd been interviewing Peter Beck from Rocket Lab and was looking at some of the new sensors that they were putting up into orbit. So then started looking at how we could just leverage some tech and innovation to give small players a little bit of an edge against some of the larger operators. So using a metric of data which would give better insights. So stuff like multispectral analysis and high resolution optical imagery to pinpoint, the difference between bird life and breaking waves.
Wow. And I think one of the themes that has come through here is, and I'm not sure if I'm using exactly the right terms, but it's kind of like, the term around citizen science, and, you kind of using the language around cutting edge science, but kind of for real people, and making, tech accessible to communities to be able to have those insights. And this seems to be what you're building around the platform that you're developing. So, and Anua Open World is the name of the platform.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
So
yeah.
So Anua is really it's in Cook Islands Maori, it's earth and island and dirt, and so that really kind of fitted in with the whole added value processing and extraction, and just kind of getting back to community roots. But I think it's equally as cool in the satellite space. But you're totally right. It is about one thing that I found, like if you're like me and you don't have a huge depth of knowledge in one like I don't know anything about reading different satellite data. But so if you're like me and you really want to do something for your community or with your community, and you want to get some fishing boats, it's really difficult to actually incorporate some of the data that's floating out there. So I think there's a huge opportunity there to open that up. And we are dealing, I mean, beyond fishing boats and uh, extraction of enzymes out of pawpaw. We're dealing with some really big things in terms of environmental and social hurdles. And I think the only way to really get serious traction there, is to open up some of that data to incorporate the work of citizen science with scientists, and also cross discipline connection as well, because there's a whole lot of silos going on.
Absolutely. Look, I'm so impressed, because what you're talking about is this really big problem, in the Pacific Island community, and then you're trying to do something. You're actually trying to make the world a better place and do something about it, and trying to find your way through in terms of talking to different scientists, putting different technology together. Like, we could actually do this whole show just around your project, and maybe in time, when it matures and moves on, we should come back and do that, because it is so exciting, and it's really, really super awesome. Yeah, it's cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess it started off, like, it sounds really big when you talk about it like that, but it just started off as like a really small thing that I wanted to do with family. But then, as I say, like, the nature of my life is you really bumble along, and sometimes I feel like a total fruitcake. I mean, calling up someone from NASA and asking them to help with this. But it's incredible. It's incredible how people are willing to help. And yeah, I guess I didn't intend for it to get big. I mean, it's still a very intimate project, and I know we've got other stuff to talk about, but a lot of it's been really personal, kind of family stuff. Like, I had to smuggle fentanyl into Raro because my grandmother was allergic to morphine, and then I had to inject that into her as her pain relief.
So that
There's
wasn't available.
no,
So you had to find a
and
different way. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah, and then same thing. I mean, everything is so much is connected. Like, Dad died in his 50s from type 2 diabetes, and if he was in New Zealand, he jumped a very high chance that he would still be alive, because they would have had the equipment. And so there's some really basic kind of fundamental stuff that it's just not good enough. It's just not good enough in this day and age, that there aren't the resources there. So, as I say, it started off as a really personal thing, but I think there's the potential for so many communities to work together and to leverage not only innovation and technology, as we're talking about, but just leverage the collaboration between each other as well, which is what I've become really focused on.
Absolutely. And I kind of love the way this all kind of, in a way, rolls back to your grandmother with the stories that she was telling. And then that's because that's the world you're living in at the moment, is, you're relaying all these different stories about people. So yeah, that's pretty cool. And so maybe reflecting on that project, or whatever else might be relevant, in terms of tech innovation, it's obviously really exciting, but it can be really challenging as well. So can you share some of the upsides and downsides of innovation from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, hopefully, I am dealing with the upsides in terms of innovation as a way to really leverage stuff and to make some fundamental changes. And sorry, I'll probably ramble a little bit, because that's what I do. But so many things are connected. Like, I mentioned type 2 diabetes before. Like, quarter of the population in a lot of the islands have it. In places like Nara, it's 40% of the population, and a lot of that comes from some of the changes that you think a lot of this comes from innovation in the first place. So getting packaged high calorie based foods to an island is innovative in a sense. Like, you don't have to produce it anymore, but then you can get the downside as well, where you get major health issues, which then requires another level of innovation to deal with it. So you get both. So they often walk hand in hand, side by side, hand in hand. I think the other danger with innovation is we sometimes have the potential to lose the point of it as well. Like we lose
Mm.
that human connection to it, and it's easy to go down innovation's sake for innovation's sake. And I do that because I I chase after the next shiny thing, and oh, there's a new satellite sensor, but I have to remind myself to go back to the original point and what it's about. So I think often there is that danger that we lose the point.
Yeah, that's very true. Um, yeah, the point. I've been thinking about that. This is a complete tangent. I've been thinking about that a bit recently because I've gotten into sharesies. It's kind of the first time I've ever really traded stocks before because it was just always too hard to get into before somehow. Anyway, doing it now. And then I was having a chat with a friend on the weekend and we were sort of talking about different stocks. And he had this really great point, and it's kind of goes to what you're saying about kind of meaning and purpose. What if you kind of only looked at stocks or investing in businesses where they're actually trying to do good for the world? So maybe they're making some new kind of product that's made out of, I don't know, wool, and that means it's better for the environment somehow. Or if you only invested in things or in companies that were doing good, that you'd probably have more money in your wallet at the end of the day because of that, because the
Mm.
joint power of doing good and the purpose behind things. And that just does seem to bring more momentum than the more shallow
Mm.
kind of investment. I was like, oh, I actually super like that. I'm going to look into that a lot more.
Yeah, I think
But you've
that
got to find these businesses that are actually doing it.
that's interesting. I think there's probably a couple of tangents that we can go down from that, but I think there's incredible potential in that space, like the sharesies, and you could see that happen with the whole GameStop fiasco as well. Like
Yeah.
these poor Wall Street short sellers who just got obliterated by the power of retail investors just working together en masse. That's incredible. But when you think about that power, in the context of what you're talking about, with really getting behind companies and enterprise that are working to solve some of our major environmental issues. There's incredible potential in that. So it's really cool.
Definitely. Okay, so you work in the media business. You're the editor of M2. Let's talk a bit about that. So, do you have any thoughts about the role that media play in terms of shaping sentiment or even the environment around we encourage tech entrepreneurs to take risks or create opportunities? Kind of having a go, and trying to make not so that they run away and hide if they fail.
Yeah. This is something I'm really passionate about, and there's probably two parts to that question as well, because you talk about sentiment, so that's kind of a wider thing, um, and I think just in terms of an economic kind of landscape thing, like the media actually helps drive a lot of sentiment, which then goes on and affects other things like how many people go out and
Mm,
buy couches and that kind of thing, or cars when they're worried about the economy falling off a cliff. And that was really prominent last year, like earlier on in the year, when you had a lot of the headlines talking about how everything was going to collapse. Employment was going to go through the roof. The economy was going to, as I say, fall off a cliff. Like there is a danger in that starts to become a self-fulfilling prophecy as well, because that starts to kind of shape
mm,
sentiment. And I think the media has a big responsibility around that. Luckily, it turned out that it didn't quite pan out that way. We still, kept things going largely in most sectors. But in terms of that tall poppy thing, which I think is really the kind of the crux of your question as well, I think we are reliant on entrepreneurs and founders and businesses to really help drive our economy. And we're talking about innovation and technology, and to really help drive those things as well. And I think we do have a responsibility to support our entrepreneurs. And I think there's a balance as well. You don't want entrepreneurs taking the piss and um,
mm,
blowing investors' money on stupid stuff. But they should be able to fail without feeling like they need to go and hide somewhere or move to South America. They should be able to. They should be able to give things a fair whack, without just getting pummeled. And at the end of the day, like I think I'd rather put my money behind someone who's been through the war, who's had a few hard knocks, who knows what it's like to fail. I think I think we can be quite buffered from failure. and we know that failure is not necessarily a bad thing in the long term, and there are lessons.
Yeah, I
Resilience
totally.
comes.
Exactly. Yeah, you learn from each of your failures. Well, they do say, you're supposed to have lots of failures and only a few successes because, that is such a great learning process. But there is something that, really can be quite full on about failure. It's like taking a knock. And
Mm,
it depends how all it plays out. But because when you have a knock, you kind of retreat a bit, you get more kind of inwardly focused, and it can take you a bit to get back up and kind of get back out there. Um, even something as simple as, I don't know if you call it a failure or not, but having a run in with a key stakeholder and it hasn't gone well, and maybe they haven't behaved very well. And so you're like, oh, kind of what happened. And then particularly I find if you're doing kind of outward stuff like this, you've kind of got to pick yourself up and psych yourself back up and speak to some buddies and go, everything's okay with me, isn't it? And they're like, yeah, no, you're great. Off you go, get back out. And you're like, okay, cool. But there's something wrong in the way we're teaching people around failure and success, because that is such a process, and it's probably actually a
mm,
really hard thing to break as well.
yeah, yeah, it's so
Whole
true.
fail fast, but still don't fail. Yeah.
Yeah, and success and failure are like they are connected as well. I mean,
Hand in hand.
it's easy not to fail if you don't do anything.
Yes, well, that's it. Exactly. Um, yeah. And so maybe turning now to think about kind of, digital culture and digital behaviors and okay, let's talk about the talent market at the moment in New Zealand. So, and it's pretty interesting due to COVID. We've got lots of global New Zealanders coming home. We've got also lots of New Zealanders who can't perhaps leave as easily, apart from the Tasman bubbles just open up. So maybe they can go there if they want. But it's really interesting because that whole OE, from a New Zealander perspective, is kind of like this rite of passage.
Mm.
And, how do you think it's affecting insights that people might, have or bring to their roles, this kind of travel restriction piece?
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. I mean, I'm not in the recruitment space, of course, so I can't speak in great depth, but I don't speak in great depth about anything. But I think it's a really interesting kind of shift. On one hand, you have some amazing people coming back into the country. So
Mm.
like the likes of Delwyn Waller, who's ex JPL, ex NASA engineer. You can go and learn under her at Auckland Uni for now, which is amazing. So you've got this, you've got this incredible talent coming back home, but at the same time, as you're saying, we lose that OE experience, and we've been always a very outward looking nation. That's kind of part of our DNA. We go out and we we look to the world, and we can incorporate lots of different lessons and bring it back and integrate it. But maybe at the same time, maybe it's not so bad for us to become a little more introspective as well. And there's incredible insights within our own borders. Like we were talking before about some of the indigenous knowledge and insights. I mean, we've got incredible STEM. Like we struggle to get high numbers of Māori and Pacific Island kids
Mm.
into STEM fields, but that is part of the DNA of our culture here, like using stars and ocean currents to navigate thousands of years ago. It's pretty. I mean, that's pretty STEM, if you ask me. So I think there's a
Yes,
lot.
it's true.
Like, we have a lot of insights here, and also it's one thing to be obsessed about Silicon Valley and to be looking at what's happening there. We have a lot of insights and a lot of knowledge within our elderly. I think we can be quite ageist, not just in terms of
Mm.
employment, but then also in terms of like the advice and the knowledge and the insights that we take on. I think there's some incredible wisdom uh, uh, here that we should tap into in that respect as well.
I love that. There's some great points. Some great points. I've found it quite interesting. If I think about the security talent market, which is the one that I'm in, there's some really interesting things happening in our talent market. So we haven't got as many security people coming into the country, or not able to recruit from overseas in the way that we used to. So what's happening is there are kind of not enough security people for the amount of roles, and so you've got kind of people moving around roles. But then also, and if you think about the whole failure success thing we were talking about before, we've got more people going into more senior roles than perhaps they would normally get in a normal market, but the market is the market is the market. So, they're getting these really kind of great roles and actually some really interesting experiences for them to learn in. So they're probably going to be learning more than if they, perhaps we were able to travel. But yeah, the overseas travel thing, I do think because it can be really good to do when it's possible, because overseas there are roles that we've never heard of, even some industries that, like things can be more complex over there just because how it's all set up. But then in some ways in New Zealand you have perhaps it's less complicated, but I think individuals do more in their roles because they tend to be generalists across lots of areas, whereas overseas you tend to specialize in one kind of niche, and it's a huge niche over there, but it's probably doesn't translate to New Zealand. So yeah.
That's interesting. I was listening to your last podcast with, was it Damon Henderson?
Yes. Yeah.
Incredible. Like, that dude is a rock star. Incredible. And I wonder, if he wasn't able to have the overseas experience that he had, how that would have changed his path as well.
Yeah. So, but I guess it'll all be temporary, but it's just kind of for how long it is temporary. So we will see how things go.
If we go back to, because you were kind of talking before about, we were talking about bumbling, right? And I think this is interesting as well, because a lot of innovation happens by accident. It's mutation, and it's a lot of it is. But in terms of your shift from was it psychology into like those psychology and security, nowadays we can see how connected they are. But like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, was that the case necessarily?
No, not at all. Like at the time, because there was a group of psychologists working for this company. This was the one that was in MI5, and they need an organizational change person to go work in the behavioral science unit looking at security culture. And the other psychologists were like, oh, security? Oh, no, that sounds like a weird sideways step. Why would you ever do that? Our progression is junior psychologist, associate, and then principal. Like, this is the way we're going over here. So an amazing opportunity, which obviously I landed, but actually a lot of people didn't actually want it either, which I was like flabbergasted at, because I was like, oh, but it just sounds cool. What a great experience to do that. And then obviously got into security and realized that this is a really cool area. It's actually really interesting. Not for everyone maybe, but I thought it was really great. And just the behavioral stuff was huge, because all the organizations were struggling, and actually probably still are, with how you get people to not just be aware of security behaviors, but actually change their own behavior and internalize those behaviors and do the right thing. So yeah. And then when some opportunities lead to the next opportunity, but again, there's an opportunity for you to say no. But if you say yes, then actually things can start really happening. And I was told once that you should never procrastinate on decisions too much. If you really want to do it, you should say yes and then kind of work out the details later. I mean, there's always a balance with that, right? But yeah, if you procrastinate too much, then the opportunity will be gone and you won't be any further forward.
Yeah,
So,
that's good.
yeah.
Sorry, I have one more question just about the psychology thing.
Yes.
Obviously, if you get into that kind of field that shows like a really such a profound interest in human, of course, human psychology and other people, was that behind this podcast as well? Was that part of what this is about? Is this that kind of interest in the human psyche?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the digital culture piece was because I moved into an IT, managing IT role, and we had all this new technology that was coming towards us. It was all the Microsoft Office 365 and Teams, and it was a different way for a organization to communicate, and and processes to run, and it was all about how do I get people in the organization to really think about what this means in terms of their habits and behavior and how they're going to communicate. And then, I've been really interested in security culture. Digital culture is fascinating as well. So again, it was kind of layering it in a different area, but obviously security and IT are very, very linked. And similar to what you were saying, I think the podcast was recognizing the fact that I'm not a guru in, I'm not a guru in digital culture. I'm not, but it's about a learning journey, talking to people along the way that might have some input or tips or inspirational, or I have a lot to learn. And then that's when started the podcast, and then started loving the podcast, I have to admit. And it's a bit like you were saying, you take a bit of the person who you interview with you sort of for the rest of your life, really. Like, you kind of incorporate your discussion and what you've learned from them, and you kind of take it with you. It's actually super powerful, I must admit. It's been a real joy to do these and to chat to people like yourself, Andre.
Yeah, that's cool.
And turning things back on you a bit more, because you kind of switch things up on me there, trying to interview me. No, it's good to have a two-way conversations for sure. But I did want to touch back on your role at M2, because you're quite transparent, and that you talk about yourself as being an introvert, yet you're kind of like the figurehead of M2. You MC their M2 success conferences. You have your own podcast that you do as part of that. Like, how does that work for you? How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm still trying to figure that out. Like, I don't feel like don't feel like personally I have much to contribute to wide discourse. Like, I don't know enough to actually add to the noise out there. But what I have is a really deep interest for other people, and I, like you, I kind of share that. That an interview can be a really special, cathartic kind of experience, and one where you can really open up and get a lot of insights. I find that really amazing. I don't think so. Within that context, I never kind of think about myself as being in the spotlight. It's always about the other person, and we have enough incredible people in this country that I get to talk to. So that is enough. So I reconcile it by kind of standing back a little bit and letting the other person be at the center, and that's enough. I mean, if you gave me a choice, again, not to completely shatter the perception that I was this really sophisticated editor of a lifestyle magazine. I mean, I collect vintage computers, and if you gave me a choice between emceeing in front of 600 people and being at home in my undies fixing an IBM 5150, I would go for that any day of the week. Like, that is really where I feel comfortable. But when you, when you push yourself, it's an amazing thing as well. So I just have to keep pushing outside of my comfort zone, and it's always rewarding. It is always rewarding, and there's always an old computer at home to fix afterwards.
I've got a dear friend that fixes old computers, and he's got a massive shed of them, so I can only to store them all in, right? So I can only imagine what you've got going on at home there.
Yeah, I think it's a sickness. I knew I had a problem when I bought the Auckland Tatari Museum, and I needed a warehouse to store that in. So
you bought a museum?
Yeah, maybe you can give me some psychological help after.
And then on the pushing yourself thing, like, I think it's such a must for people. Like, I do feel like every week I'm doing something kind of slightly scares me or pushes me beyond my boundaries, but you just kind of got to do it anyway. And then we all have strategies that we use to kind of cope with it. One of mine is preparation. I like to make sure that I know enough to have a conversation, or that I can go up there feeling confident, that I don't have to at least worry about the content so much. It's more just the delivery. And do you have any strategies that you use?
No, I should prepare. I think that would help a lot. No, I should definitely develop more strategies. again, I just think it's like I really have this innate
Sounds like you got a
curiosity.
mental strategy though. You're like, no, it's about them.
Yeah, yeah, I guess that is.
That
I
must
guess that
help.
is. Yeah, yeah. And I'm really interested. Like I'm really genuinely interested in other people, and so that's so a lot of the interviews are on the fly. Even the ones on stage are kind of just like it's a conversation, and I go along.
Really? I'm in
Um,
awe.
well, I used. I mean, I found that in the early days. I'd have everything kind of scripted and all my questions, and I'd be so focused on getting to the next question that I wasn't really listening to the answers. So
Yep.
I found that it was better to work hard by listening and then getting the next question from what I was listening to. I just found it was a deeper kind of conversation. So in a way, it was actually less preparation was deeper, resulted in a deeper conversation.
But
Um,
some harder work on the day, I suppose,
yeah,
isn't it, when you're
yeah,
listening? Yeah.
but
Makes
again,
sense.
I mean, yeah, it's just it's just people having a conversation.
It is. Yeah. And so, yeah, what are you looking forward to? What's kind of coming up for you or M2? What's going on?
Yeah, I have no vintage computer purchases coming up, and so that's probably a good thing. But in terms of M2, we've got another live event, which is always a good thing in this kind of era of global pandemics. But we've got our summit coming up on May 20. So you've been along to that before. You've shared
I
your
have.
insights, and it's really cool to do that in front of an audience as well. Like, I mean, this is cool. This whole digital thing is really cool. But when you're in front of a audience as well, you can hear the murmurs when you make a bad joke, or hopefully you can hear the laughter as well when you make a
Yeah,
funny
and they
joke.
are
Or
really great events. Like I did find it like, got lots of energy from the day, lots of ideas from the really varied speakers that you have. Like it is a cool event.
yeah, and again, it's really like I love that we're in a position to be able to celebrate some of those entrepreneurs as well. I don't think it's necessarily something that we do enough in the media, and we can go back to that thing, but so much of the headlines, it's really negativity seems to drive the click throughs, I think, which is probably a testament to human nature in an audience. But I think it's just lovely to be able to celebrate success, and so we've got people like Vaughan Ferguson coming along. He sold Vend for $500 million, and we've got Scott Walker, who's the director who directed Nicolas Cage for Frozen Ground, and had like
Wow.
the top spot on Netflix last year in the US, and so New Zealand director. But it's just awesome to be able to get people like Vaughan and Scott, and then other incredible, you know, innovators and entrepreneurs together, and just kind of celebrate, um, you know, success and maybe even failure along the way, but just like
Yes.
celebrate the people that are pushing things.
Excellent. Oh, well, Andre, this has been awesome to have you on. I've been looking forward to this for a while, and yeah, you are fantastic. So thank you so much. But
Thank
it'd be
you.
great. Is there any kind of last words you want to leave people with, or calls to action before we finish up?
Um, Maybe it goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of like even a newer project where I was just looking at how we could use some family land and wanting to open up some export pipelines and give a small community some autonomy and diversity to the revenue streams. So that but what really helped was reaching out to people and getting them to help, and then it turned into this momentum that was
Mm,
and this vision that was beyond me. So it was, you have all of a sudden a whole lot of people really driving it as well, and I think more of that should happen, and I think if you ask for help, people give it. It's quite amazing. So
I
maybe it's just that.
completely And I completely agree, and I really look forward to seeing how, newer open source evolves in the near future. So thanks so much, Andre. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.